Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guest today. With me is Krista Crawford, who's a human resource consultant, adjunct instructor at Virginia Tech and Chaplain College, and group chair with Vistage Worldwide Incorporated. Diane Helbig is Chief Improvement Catalyzer at Helbig Enterprises, providing guidance and training to business owners and leaders around the world. And Peter Winick works with individuals and organizations to build and grow revenue streams through their thought leadership platforms and is host of the Leveraging Thought Leadership podcast. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Here's today's ethics challenge. Last week, Australia made world headlines by passing legislation to ban social media use for children under 16 years old. Many support the intent of the law, which seeks to protect children from the various ills associated with online use, including cyberbullying, invasion of privacy, depression, and addictive behavior. However, the new law raises a slew of ethical questions. To what degree can platform providers ensure who is or isn't using their platform? Much of the burden of enforcement will inevitably fall on parents who may be struggling on many fronts with the stresses of raising teenagers. Would they be subject to prosecution for allowing their own children access? Is this different from prohibition or past laws against using marijuana? Libertarians might advocate for removing all such laws, including heroin and prostitution. Does the government have the right to make these kinds of decisions for the people? Is it ultimately beneficial to pass laws that may be unenforceable? On the one hand, it might drive usage underground and limit it from becoming normalized. On the other hand, doesn't passing laws likely to be violated undermine general respect for the law? There's a certain dark irony in China rigidly limiting access of children to social media, and in particular TikTok, while providing access to the rest of the world. Do we have to become like China to protect ourselves from China? Or do we simply give in to the inevitable and hope for the best? The floor is open.
Well, I'd like to jump in and just own that I was on vacation when all of this took place, and I was on a self-imposed no media time, and I didn't even know that this happened. So when you asked me to be here tonight, I did a little bit of research because anytime we're looking at ethical situations, backstory is important. And I wanted to know what was the underlying reason that this happened. So in that process, I found that the Senate in Australia voted 102 to 13 to pass this. And that the House, it was 34-19. So this wasn't a close, battle. And the underlying issues were really big issues that we all grapple with. Control, children being cyberbullied, children not sleeping because they're staying up all night. And so the thing that came to me is, or the big question I have is, and sort of you inferred it, is, does a law have meaning if you can't enforce it?
Right.
So what do we do? Like, I can't take a stance yet because I don't have enough data. I'd love to hear what other people are thinking and what other questions come to mind.
So I would add with a bit of a different twist to what you said, Krista, is at the end of the day, everything's enforceable. The question is at what cost, at what resources, at whatever. So, is there a social police media going to stand in front of everybody's house? No. I mean, I can give you a list of a dozen laws that aren't, jaywalking or whatever.
Right.
But the question is it just a good starting point, right? The fact that we have the data now to show that there's damage being done to kids from dopamine to, the list is pretty long. It's not an unknown, it's a known. So to me, there's almost an obligation, a responsibility to say, okay, well, this isn't good. Now, whether 16 is the number or 14 or 50, whatever, who knows? But I think the question is, what are we willing to give up in terms of privacy, cost? I was thinking about getting ready for today as well, going to the movies. Right. There's, when I was a kid, it was cool. It was fun, a challenge to sneak into a PG movie when you were 11 and the age was 12 or whatever. There was no movie police out there, and
Yeah.
so anyway, I think it's at what cost are we willing to invest in enforcement as a society? That's a bigger issue.
And what is the penalty? Because, Peter, so initially I was thinking, wow, if you can't enforce it. But then I started thinking, Peter, when you were talking about the parents of the boy in Oxford, Michigan, who got sent to jail because they let their son have a gun and he walked into a school and started shooting. And that was the first time parents were being held responsible for the behavior of their children. And then it happened in Florida after that. So maybe it's if a country feels strongly about something, then we take a stand and we say, okay.
Well, I would add one twist to that is it's not just what is the penalty, but who are you penalizing, right? If the parents get a $50 fine, that's different than saying to Facebook, every instance we find, you're going to be fined $1 million. Guess what? They'd figure that out real quick.
Yeah.
So who
is being penalized? Right. Is it the parents? Is it the
I would almost put that burden on the social media companies because
well, I would too, but
and that's where I was going to head with the social media companies. I mean, reasonable effort is the test that they're given to keep children from having access. Well, we probably won't know what that true definition of reasonable effort is until it's tested.
Right.
How well have they defined it? From what I found, they haven't defined what reasonable effort is.
Right.
And is there an unfair duty placed on the business, or is there an unfair duty placed on the parents?
Right.
Let's just assume the children can't assume all that duty, right? They're not in the position to make those decisions.
So just checking a box saying I'm over 16.
Sure.
I'm not a robot.
Yeah,
but
you
then
can't
you
do
look
that.
but then you look at Instagram, and I've been seeing ads nonstop that Instagram has implemented these parental controls that the kids can't do anything about. And they're talking about it and they're saying, listen, we get it. Here are all of the barriers or, all of the levers that you can pull to prevent people from contacting your children, to prevent, all of these things. So, they're being, I mean, maybe they saw the writing on the wall and thought, we better get ahead of this before it's mandated. I don't know.
If you create like a cyber ID that kids have to have, you're also putting them in more jeopardy because that data set is going to be somewhere and there's access. So in an effort to protect the children, there's also some vulnerability. How do you monitor whether someone's 16 or not? How do you do that and protect them at the same time?
Exactly.
That law of unintended consequences just comes up again and again and again. And it gets depressing, really, when you see these well-intentioned efforts to do good that end up backfiring and making things worse.
Yeah.
Well, and the lines today are very blurry, right? So it's clear what a social media company is, but what if there's an education platform where we can help each other do homework and there's a chat function? And how do you define?
That's a great point, right?
I don't think every piece of technology is easily defined as it's an apple or it's a banana.
Yeah.
Another point that came out is that often the social media is a safe place for LGBTQI, for people to find like-minded individuals. And particularly in a country like Australia, where you have massive landmass between cities, where can you find that community if you're not allowed to access through social media?
Yeah. Which is sort of a double-edged sword because those folks really need a community, right? But they also then open themselves up to the cyberbullying and the hate and the danger and all of the bad things that they are confronted with. So it's both sides of the coin.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, Krista. I never thought about this before your last comment that if you have kids in school and, there are kids who are, for whatever reason, victims, they get picked on, they get isolated, they get ostracized. And maybe they can find communities online where they can get support virtually that they
Right.
can't get in real life. And that could be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as you said, Diane, then what kind of predators can sneak into those arenas disguised
Right.
as similar young people?
Yeah.
The other thing that came to mind for me is we're looking at social media and at the school age children. We haven't mastered how to protect our children in face-to-face environments.
That's so true.
And so how can we expect we're going to do this in a cyber world?
Right.
Children in our country particularly, they're dying by guns. They're being bullied face to face.
Yeah.
We can't have civil discourse without
Right.
calling each other names and using ugly language. And
Yeah.
we're not modeling the behaviors that we want to see, whether it's cyber behavior or face-to-face behavior.
Yeah.
So this situation, it just can go in so many different directions in terms of how can we behave as adults in other ways to lead children to learn how to dialogue and have conversation and protect themselves too. Like, no, you can't do that. And no, I won't let you near me.
Well,
Yeah,
but I think there are more built-in protections in the real world. Like you wouldn't have a 34-year-old man, pretend to sign up to be a Girl Scout, like in person. Like that's just not going to happen, right? Versus the equivalent of that happening in an online place. So there's different degrees of safety that inherently exist in the real world.
Well, there are and there aren't, because you
Yeah.
have people grooming, like they know which kids don't have a great family life, and then they go, predators go groom them, pedophiles, and and then we have all sorts of trouble, and the parents, I think part of the problem is you can't legislate parenting, right? And there's no certificate that you get that says, okay, you're gonna know what to do when you become a parent. And so, so there's that, and that in this country, our politicians are loath to do anything to hold major corporations accountable for anything. So, we wouldn't have gotten to a point where the parents were going to jail, in my opinion, with the school shootings, if we had legislated some common sense gun controls, and I'm a gun owner, so I'm not anti the Second Amendment, but come on, common sense and good judgment says, really? But no, because they're contributors to their campaigns.
But would legislation have actually stopped that? Do you think?
No, I don't think it would stop it, but I think it would. I mean, I would hope that over time it would curtail, these massive magazines, and it would make it harder for these kids to walk into these schools so armed. I mean,
Oh, well, yeah, there's that. But I meant in terms of the parents acting responsibly
Oh, no,
in the home. And that's
no,
not something we can
no,
legislate.
you
I
can't
mean,
legislate it.
it
You
would be
can't.
nice to mandate parenting classes on all kinds of levels. But then, of course, you have, well, who's going to decide what that education looks like?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And
But can you legislate that parents won't allow their children to use their computer account to access?
Yeah, right.
I mean, how do you legislate that?
Mm-mm.
It's really going to be interesting to see what case law comes out of this
It is. I
decision.
agree. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how you do it. I remember when my son was little, and we had a computer in the dining room, so we could watch, and he got on Club Penguin, which was supposed to be this very safe environment for children to hang out with other children. And he kept saying, that, and my husband and I kept trying to say, and he was, young, and we kept trying to say to him, listen, not so much. And so the way that we proved the point I sat in the living room on a laptop and I made a Club Penguin account as a child, right? And I went to whatever room he was in, and I started engaging with him. And he said to my husband, see, Daddy, this kid's just like me. And my husband said,
Well,
well,
good for
no,
you.
that's your mother, right? So just to be, but we're those kinds of parents.
Right.
So, I don't know what you do with the others.
And it gets harder all the time. I mean, when we were raising our kids, we didn't have TV
Yeah.
and there was no streaming. So it was very easy.
Yeah.
We had a DVD player with I
Right.
think a 9-inch screen for special occasions. And but then over time, by the time my youngest daughter was in high school, the smartphones were coming out, and it's a whole different ballgame.
It's a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
And kids find a way.
Hmm.
We all did before we had super technology. Kids
Right.
were supposed to go into movies, under the age of 17.
Yeah.
Right.
Not there.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. Got
They-
someone to buy us beer. I mean,
It's also what the norms are at a point in time. I remember being a kid at 7, 8 years old, and my grandmother giving me money to go to the candy store to buy cigarettes. And I remember like Benson and Hedges 100s. And she was a great, like, could you imagine today? Like if you,
no.
but that was kind of normal. And I get a
Yeah.
lollipop. I'm like, this is cool. Sure, I'll go get grandma cigarettes. Like,
Yeah.
and that wasn't, I don't think that was out of the ordinary then.
No, it wasn't.
Right? So,
Yeah.
but today, if you walked into a candy store and saw a kid trying to buy a pack of cigarettes, oh my
Yeah.
God, where's that parent? What's going on?
Yeah.
So the norms have changed. So I think some of
Yeah.
this is there's hardware, there's software, there's social norms, there's all this, it's just because it's legislated yesterday doesn't mean the problem is solved today.
Right.
So
Right.
I think
It
it's an
is gonna be
experiment
interesting.
for the rest of us to say, well, what'd they do right? What'd they get wrong? What did they do
Yes.
this? What is enforceable? What's not? Like,
Yeah.
it's an interesting
You
thing for
mean
us over here to look at.
we should learn from experience, Peter? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that would be, that's kind of a novel. I don't want
Wait
to
a
get crazy.
minute.
I don't want to bring anything crazy to the table, but that would be nice.
Peter, I want to piggyback on something you said much earlier about content. I think limiting children's access to information, there's a lot of good material on TikTok.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's not appropriate. Social media provides an opportunity to learn about things that we wouldn't normally explore. And so
Yeah.
you're limiting as well opportunities.
Right. I mean, I don't know if you heard this, but I remember a couple of years ago when they were really trying to clamp down in the schools. And so kids who were in high school, who were doing research projects, couldn't do them because they couldn't access, you put in certain words and you were blocked, like breast, right? So they couldn't research breast cancer or
Right.
whatever the thing was, because all of these limitations had been put so tightly on those computers that then they can't learn, they can't explore divergent mind, right? We're not teaching them how to think because we're limiting the information that they have access to.
Well, that really comes back to the parenting. It's a
Mhm.
lot harder to monitor. Again, my wife used to joke, Mrs. So and so is doing really well in 4th grade. It was so clear that she was doing all of her son's homework.
Right.
Because it's easier to do my son's homework than to help my son do his homework.
Yeah.
And it's easier to shut down completely or just let them to it.
Yeah.
Especially if you got, but we had 4 kids within 6 years, and we were exhausted all the time.
No doubt. Well, plus then they changed the math. So I couldn't, and I like math, right?
Yeah.
And I could not help my children.
Oh, I wrote some
Math.
op-eds about that one.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, what about let's go back to prohibition. Is that comparable?
I think it is. I think it goes underground. I mean, were they really able to police it? They're still moonshiners. You know,
No, but the
different.
difference with prohibition was it was an adult issue
That's true.
versus the children issue. So,
Uh,
you could argue, all these states now where abortion's now going to be illegal. Doesn't mean it goes away, right?
Right.
So if you have money, if you have resources, if you're whatever, you can still get those things. And I mean, all prohibition did was create this huge underground,
Right.
black market that made a lot of
Yeah.
people a lot of money. Is there going to be a black market and somebody selling, 13-year-olds an unlocked phone or something? I don't know. Maybe some crafty kid in middle school is going to do that, right?
No doubt. Listen, my son figured out how to get the NFL channel without paying for it. I shouldn't say that out loud on this. Can we?
A friend of my son's. I want to restate that.
Exactly. Well,
My
it
son.
technically was a friend of my son.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, my child.
There comes Roger Goodell knocking at your door now.
It's okay. It doesn't always work. Let me just say, it's tricky.
what
So
about,
laws can
let's
be
say-
reversed.
Was that?
Yeah. But depending on how society responds, laws can be reversed. And
Yeah, right.
so maybe the better mental energy is how do we create virtual spaces that represent the values and norms of the communities we live in? And maybe that's a conversation for another day for digital ethics. But I mean, it's going to come down to how is it legislated? What laws come out of this, or what casework comes out of it to see how it's actually applied?
That's what I'm
You
curious
find
about.
reasonable steps. How do you're going to find companies that don't do it? What type of support and evidence are you going to need for that?
Right.
But it also goes back to the boundaries and the borders don't exist the way they used to. So
Yeah.
it used to be if you were in school and there was a bullying incident and little Billy punched you in the nose and took your lunch money, that was clearly your mom's getting a call from the principal, blah, 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 right?
Right.
If something happened Saturday morning in the park, the principal didn't know about it. But now with social media, right, I think a lot of educators are getting informed that there's been bullying that's happened because of something that might have started in the playground that went offline in the evenings and so
Right.
this who's in charge of what, when, where, why is a little
Yeah.
gray to still, Jonathan's term now, in terms of what happened where.
But Peter, we might not have had virtual bullying, but notes. There were still ways that people bullied others that weren't just people punching them in the face.
No, I understand, but
Behind and it's
Sure.
been
but
going
once you
on a
left
long time.
school, there couldn't be all these chats and things and text and it's exponentially, more now.
More access.
And what is done about it, right? Like I think about like when I was in junior high school and a girl was bullying me and my mom took me to the assistant principal's office and we talked to the assistant principal. And so then everyone was put on alert, right? So what do you do about it? It happens. It's going to happen in one way or another. It's happening out there in the cyberverse, right? And these kids, who then is going to take the responsibility for saying, okay, you crossed the line, your phone's being taken away from you or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like,
That goes back, I think, to Giannis's point of, well, what's where the parents being held responsible at what point, right? Or not.
right.
So,
Yeah.
and I think we all know there are times where, when you have kids, someone's house has a reputation of not good things happen there, whether it's inappropriate television or out, like whatever. You say, you know what? I'm going to make a decision. My kid's not going there. 'Cause
Right.
That's okay. And
Yeah.
whatever, right? Or you can say, well, I don't care. It happens over there. But like, that's a decision you make. Now, those parents still have responsibility if they're whatever, serving alcohol to minors or whatever the case may be.
Right.
That's a third level stopgap. The first is if you know about it, what are you doing about it? You're not going to wait for the law to be enforced. I don't think you will.
Are we trying to correct what is, or are we trying to create what it ought to be? Do we even really know what it is we're
That's a great
trying to
question.
address?
Well, I think in this case, my instincts, my thoughts are trying to prevent the damage that we believe is occurring based on we now have enough data over enough years, over enough kids, that this is bad. Like, you go back to the 40s and 50s and think of the ads for cigarettes with the guy in the white coat, the doc, smoking cigarettes, right? That was accepted. That was
Yeah.
normal. Oh, well, relax you, whatever. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. When women got the right to smoke.
Yes.
Gee, thanks. Yeah.
Yes.
right. The right
Yeah,
to,
I could go off on that tangent all day.
I
Yeah.
know, let's not. Yeah.
No, Krista, you mentioned earlier, these groups and coalescing around core values. I think one of the real challenges we have today is identifying core values. We are
Right.
so polarized now
Yeah.
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
don't know if, how many of us are really on the same page when
Yeah.
it comes to those core values.
I mentioned that I hadn't watched much television last week or read much on but when I came back, I watched an episode of 60 Minutes, and it was about Smith Island, which is a little island in the middle of the Chesapeake. And the only way you can get to it is by boat. And in the previous century, there was a very active oyster community. It was a big economic driver. Over time, people have moved and the waters have risen. So there are only like 200 people left. And you're talking about values. They don't have a law enforcement officer on that island. They don't need it. There are only 200 of them.
Yeah.
Their families have been there for centuries, from the 1600s and 1700s. So you don't have to call 911. You just yell out your door, I need help. I doubt if they need anyone policing their cyber situation, because
Yeah.
people are watching what's going on.
Right.
They have these interconnected values and moral
Yeah.
code. And if you're not
Yeah.
comfortable, you don't live on that island.
Right.
Well, in Jerusalem, there's a neighborhood called Mea Shearim,
Yeah.
which is overwhelmingly Hasidic.
Yep.
Incredible population density, tens of thousands of families, many of them living at the poverty line.
Yeah.
It is, by any sociological definition, should be a hotbed of crime. And yet there's no police force.
Well, yeah, but Jonathan, aren't they living by the Bible?
Yeah.
Well,
It's you can't, human beings are human beings, right? The thing,
that's
not
true.
everything's, it's not Brigadoon, but by and large, there just isn't much crime
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
have that sense of insularity. We want to preserve our core values,
Right.
and everybody's sort of policing themselves and then their families and their neighbors and their friends, and it's just there's a sense of you act the way you're expected to act if
Right.
you want to live here.
Well, we've sort of lost that.
Well, but of course part of the problem there is that as insular as they are, it's less and less possible to keep the outside world out.
Yeah.
And so you do see influences creeping in that
Yeah.
are not really welcome, but are inevitable.
Really? That's unfortunate.
It's challenging.
Yeah.
And I go through this. Against my better judgment, I went back to part-time teaching this year. And I had previously taught in an Orthodox school that was more modern, and was more engaged in the secular world, which I thrive in because I come from a non-religious background. Now I'm in a school that is more insular, and it's interesting
Yeah.
to see that the ideals of the administration are sometimes perhaps overshooting a little bit where the kids are. And, in
Kids
my
are
own
kids.
mind, it's always a question of you want your standards, you want to project them, you want to be part of your educational value. On the
Sure.
other hand, you want to teach kids how to function. What we were talking about before, how to make good choices. And if you try to screen out everything,
Right.
then you may not be preparing them
Right.
deal with reality when they don't have the structure of the community holding them in.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
and
There's no easy answer to
communities
that.
like that, I think there's a choice, right? That either someone comes of age and stays in the community, and that's okay, right? Or they don't. And if they don't, it's a whole wild world, right?
Yeah.
They may not be prepared for,
Right.
whether it's Orthodox or Amish or any sort of tight-knit community.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was thinking about the Amish when you were talking about that, because that happens all the time. Like they leave, like the boys leave to experience the secular world, then they're supposed to come back, and many of them do. A lot of the women are leaving and going into the secular world because they just,
Yeah.
don't like it. I mean, so it's the norms change, the values change, right? I used to think it was a pendulum swing. Right now, I'm not so sure. We'll see, because it just feels like there's two pendulums
Yeah.
anymore. There's not just one.
Well, of course, you see with the Amish that, they've had to make concessions
Uh-huh.
because you just can't function in a world without
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah. Right.
And there's this tug of war going on constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. But isn't there everywhere? I mean, we're in one,
Well, sure,
right?
sure.
So I don't know. You have to be able to have civil conversations, and you have to be curious to learn about what someone else is thinking, and where it is coming from, as opposed to being judgmental, right? It's the Ted Lasso episode that,
I was told I have to go
is
watch that. I don't get
I've
it.
never watched it, but I came across this video where he's actually talking about being curious as opposed to judgmental, and it is so great that I refer to it all the time when I'm, teaching or, doing a workshop or,
That's a topic for another day, but it's long fascinated me that you look at certain movies that were hugely successful. I mean, you talk about this Ted Lasso. My wife and I love to watch Blue Bloods. Um, I was thinking of the Harrison Ford movie Air Force One.
yeah,
Um, there are movies that really speak to, traditional core values, and
yeah,
these are produced by Hollywood,
yeah,
which is the place that it seems to be the other extreme. So it seems like they understand that this is what people want,
yeah,
and they're able to produce it in a way that's
yeah.
really compelling, even though their own values are quite different. It's kind of
And
a fascinating phenomenon to me.
yeah, ethicists don't produce, gripping.
Yeah.
Anyone who's taken an ethical training, course where you click A, B, C, or D, they're usually so dry. We could do better.
Yeah.
We could attract more people into the world of ethics if we made it
We
more
got to make
attractive.
Giannis and the Ted Lasso of ethics then. That's our
There we go.
Right?
Well, many of these, the really compelling, shows and movies or stories are people that are dealing with these conflicting priorities.
Yeah,
My good friend did
yeah,
something
yeah,
that I don't approve of.
yeah,
So I have my loyalty to my friend on one side, and
yeah,
I have my commitment to values on the other, and I have the whole calculation of who's getting hurt and how much are they getting hurt and what are going to be the repercussions if I call him out publicly or if I go to the authorities. I mean,
yeah,
you can have some really gripping drama.
the tension and conflict, right?
Yeah,
Nobody would go to watch a movie of 10 people made easy choices that we all would have made, and
right.
nobody stole anything today at the store. Like that's not going to be a fun movie to watch.
Right.
We deal
Les
in
Mis,
dilemmas.
Les
Yeah,
Miserables have being in jail for the bread, right? Like, that's the heart of the movie or the play or whatever, right?
Well, it's like the news, 400 flights took off this morning and all landed on schedule.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, right. If
Yeah.
it bleeds, it leads, right? Isn't that what they say?
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. Yeah. Yeah.
So, did we solve anything today?
No, but we explored a lot.
Well, that's usually what we do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Try to think about the angles. Um,
Yeah.
Food for thought.
Go off in tangents, related and unrelated.
Right?
Yeah, make those connections. The one of the values of these kinds of discussions is that when relatable situations turn up in our own lives, we've already thought about them.
Yes.
So we don't have to start scrambling with no reference points.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's true.
Well, thank you all. Krista Crawford,
Thank you.
Diane Helbig, Peter Winick, very engaging conversation as always. For those of you who are watching and listening, if you want to hear continued backstage exclusive conversation, you can go to my Substack and become a premium member. And otherwise, we encourage you, as always, to continue grappling with the gray.